I think it's very personal, and of course I do want to share it with other people, but I don't know if this is egoistic in some way, but I really do it for myself. I have a lot of pleasure doing it. And I, a bit like I say, I think that article maybe has 2 to 3 years. I am not sure anymore. But I do feel like it's an opportunity to learn. And in contexts, especially nature recordings that I've been very prone to record in the last years, mostly very much after I moved into Sweden in 2014, because it was so close to forest and big green areas, which is a thing in Stockholm. It's just like that. And where I have been living in Portugal before, it was more suburbs and small cities. And so I think it's also like a very humble experience, because in my very personal experience, sound has so much information. And I also have the idea that, I don't know if, for example, people who study birds would have the same opinion, but I think in a forest, for example, which is something that I'm really very, very interested and very enthusiastic about since I was in Brazil, recording some places in the Atlantic forest. You don't really see that many animals. You don't really see it with your eyes, but you hear so much. And it's kind of, everything just works when you listen with attention. I can recommend actually Bernie Krauss' book called, I think it's The Great Animal Orchestra. He explains this very well. It's just, maybe this is not news to everyone or like something new, but as I've discovered, it was for me, of course, that there is an organization with everything. It's not really, there's not really like an organized sound with it. And I really feel that the more I do it, the more I learn. It's really a very personal experience. And of course, there's the pleasure of listening and discovering a place, which for me, it's incredible experience. It's the most exciting thing in the world for me, to pick up my equipment that I set during the night. I think I mentioned this somewhere in my blog, but I usually do this because I don't really want to interfere with the environment. So I set up the stuff and I come back hours later. And it's the most exciting moment to go like and run the files on the Spectrum and see what has been happening. So it's just a discovery for me. Like I keep learning, and I just think it's beautiful, actually. It's like I cannot really dissociate the learning from it being beautiful, but I understand it's extremely personal because I really like forests and all those sorts of sounds. But of course, with urban spaces and, for example, in contrast, of course, I also learn a lot. So yeah, maybe in that sense it is, but it's just, it's extremely personal. So I don't know how to extrapolate it to something else. It's just, I really do it for pleasure. I really do.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that strike me in the practice is how much of our own persona is recorded in the subjects that we are recording, you know.
Do you think that brings a unique, can I turn the questions to you as well, or a little bit? or to everyone? It's just, do you think that that reflects the work, like your own personal experience? And actually today I got a very nice comment on the Swedish Forest Textures album. I don't know this person, unless this person is going anonymous, but the comment that this person left really felt like he knew exactly what I was looking for and how I live my life. And I wonder if that is all through the recordings itself, or if it's the text that it's written as well on the Bandcamp page. but I almost felt like I accomplished a mission somehow. So yeah,
comment.
you did. Yeah, it's recent. It's from yesterday or something. Yeah.
Yeah, the first thing I thought, if you want to, if everyone wants to read the comment, you should just visit the Melissa's Bandcamp page. It will be there as the first comment on her supporters area for her last album, the Swedish Forest Textures.
Mm-hmm.
And when I read it, it sounded really like I mean, it's family or a really close friend, someone who really knows her. Like, it's interesting what you're saying now because it actually goes back again to the first conversation we had when we talked about how much of, because many of the recordings, for instance, I do, they are not so much about the sounds, but many times they are about the affections or the feelings or how I feel at the moment I press because I want to record the situation. So many times there are no, I would say there are no beautiful sounds to hear in some of those recordings, but some of them they cause others to feel in certain ways which are similar to how I felt when I was there. I remember in our conversation in Stockholm, we talked about the second track of an album I released, which is maybe up to this day, and how people come to me and say, "Oh, this recording," and then they like come with a list of affections or feelings or something they felt or whatever, and they are pretty spot on. So maybe some of your, to answer your question, but to be honest with you, I would say what I said at that point, which is I don't know, but maybe some of your of something of what you felt or some of your some interests or they could go through some of those recordings that we are sharing. I don't know.
I can say, I mean, one thing that I identified with Melissa with what you said, which I think was something I touched upon last week, is that there's kind of an ontology to doing things where you kind of just love to do it, and on the way you're learning about stuff. The only place where I kind of maybe differ a bit from Paolo is that I think that's a very powerful thing about field recordings, that there's kind of becomes this shared experience even in different time frames. But I think one thing that's also quite nice about any kind of venture sonically is that, you know, there's this, the effect of the recording or of the performance or the playing, you know, you can't always, you know, this is a noisy communication channel in the sense that you can't always assume what someone else is going to understand or feel. And I like that too, that you kind of set out to do something, you learn something in the process, but then someone has this completely independent experience, which might intersect and might not with yours or others.
Yeah, on that, actually, this I felt particular when I was recording this album, which was 2 years ago. I have never experienced like the Swedish forest quite much in that way, but there's very much, and me and Paolo, we talk about this in this conversation that is transcribed in the website. Paolo mentioned that sometimes nature can be a little bit oppressive, and maybe not exactly on the terms that he feels, but I feel there's some stuff that is really oppressive in nature. It's still beautiful, and I still really love to hear it. but for me, it just shows how ruthless it can be sometimes, and how it feels sometimes. So there's one track that is called Screeching Dawn, that it's beautiful. I think I mean, the place was magical, but it's really oppressing for me. So it's really like pouring down all the forces that nature has on you somehow. So it's very interesting. But a lot of people who heard the album, and some of those people, they comment, they say it fully relaxed them, that they have on the background of their house, or they're listening to a book and they feel like they're in the jungle, and it's just soothing. So of course it differs from people to people, and it's quite interesting also how subjective it can be.
One thing that Paolo and I kind of sent each other a quick kind of email, during the day, and something that you just hit upon that I'd be curious more to hear you about. And this is this idea of transgression, which already in these two sessions we've had have come up. Once already, this idea that Paolo mentioned last time about just because you're a foreigner doesn't necessarily mean you're a tourist. And you kind of made the point that, when you put your recording equipment out, you actually try to, then exit the scene so you're not disturbing it. But I think there's a lot of correlations, again, in other types of music where people find, be it, very quiet music, like, for example, from the Wandelweiser Collective, if anybody's familiar with that, they're kind of known as this extension of Cage to an extreme, where a lot of the concerts you really are hyper minimal, very sparse. And then you have, this very significant trend of noise music, where to some people, it just completely suits their fancy and they really enjoy it. And to some people, it's an absolute transgression. So I'd be kind of like curious, your thoughts on that, because clearly you've quite thought about it a lot. And in one of those articles that you sent, like the NPR interview, it talks about, human transgression sonically on nature. But you're now even mentioning natural transgression sonically, things that are harsh to our ears. So I would be very curious, about this idea. Music can be powerful and peaceful, but it can also be really quite abusive.
With regards to music, maybe my opinions are a bit more sparse with field recording, but I think it comes very much with music taste, what you like and how you have been evolving, I guess. I know I used to just absolutely love rock and roll, and that really put me on a really good edge. Nowadays, not so much. It just doesn't resonate as much with me. And I've been listening to a lot of different stuff, but I still like to hear to my ears, some sort of organization with music. I don't know if this is coming to answer your question, because it's just spread so much with music for me that it's just I'm really not sure like how to answer that, but I do think so. I mean, and a lot of examples come, especially where I came back from this, where I came from this, hard rock and metal background more during the teenage years. And for maybe people in my house, like my parents, for them, it's just like absolute noise and extremely disturbing. But I think then it's absolutely personal. I'm not sure if this actually was answering your question pretty well, but
I think it does. I mean, there's no right or wrong thing here. But I mean, one thing that like it seemed clear from the researchers who were talking in that NPR article, for example, is that there, at some point, maybe our transgressions onto the natural world, are objectively bad, or they were kind of making some potential assumptions there. So that's kind of interesting that, in human nature, there's this kind of focus on subjectivity, but here you kind of posed this research, or you shared this research that was really talking about what many people thought is a very clear-cut transgression on nature, and now how things are kind of getting better for, you know, the non-human world now that we're so quiet.
Yeah, about that, actually, these past days I've been on Twitter. For the people who don't know yet, on Twitter there's the field recording community is quite big and very supportive, and I think people are so much on social networks nowadays that you can actually talk a lot back and forth with people, and there's a lot of different opinions about how people are actually perceiving the what is kind of considered silence, or would have been, because people now hear so much birds in particular that they thought they didn't exist, or and there's different, for some people is a soothing thing, and for some others just weird and strange, and the pace, some people said, and also in some articles, that it feels like the pace slowed down, and which people are paying attention to listen to conversations that they wouldn't even care, but it's just all of a sudden it's just maybe the absence of traffic and a lot of people in the streets have made them, for some reason, have some sort of curiosity on all levels of the conversations, not so much the content, but someone told me even how people speak. And then involuntarily they started to have this interest on all these things. But it transmits from what I read from these people that answered me, that replied to me on Twitter, that it just transmits a bit of this weirdness, because the whole situation, there's a lot of negativity in the situation for us people. But yes, it's bringing a lot of good stuff for non-humans nowadays.
I have written some notes here about this, since we are turning to this side of our conversation, which is about the so-called changes in soundscape due to the coronavirus pandemic. I would approach this matter to expand on what Mike proposed, the idea of a music which is based on silence, or a music which is based on extremes of loudness, as both being potentially causing us some sort of I missed the word, but we are all together on this, right? So I would expand from music and from silence to the meaning in the sounds, right? To approach the meaning in the sounds. And I'll read some notes. I guess this is how I work. I'm not really someone who can like build a perfect line of thought, but I prefer working like making me questions and writing those questions, so that in the group of questions, something luckily will arise, right? So about this, the coronavirus and changes in soundscape, an expansion from silence and music, approaching meaning. A, we can't experience nature in lockdown, but a new breed of field recorders have captured the sounds of the great outdoors in all their crashing, squawking glory. This is from a textual sentence. It's a text from the Guardian, an article in which your work is mentioned, right? Mm-hmm. No, we cannot experience nature in lockdown. Actually, my opinion is that we are experiencing nature in full now. Strong, we cannot leave our houses. B, projects, citizen memory, hashtag stay home sounds. We have it now. going there. If you go to the Citizen Memory website, you will find it, right? The hashtag Stay Home Sounds. It even has a recording from a Brazilian artist called Herbert Baiocco, if you're interested. In an article, Stuart Fox, the name of the article is Art Projects Capture Sound of Cities During Coronavirus Outbreak. All these articles are mentioned in the Facebook event, right? So Stuart Fox says he is one of the heads of the project, right? In none of our lifetimes has the world ever sounded like it does right now. I don't know. It sounds to me like a really a huge phrase. Like I don't know if I agree with the right. I live it, and this is interesting, right? I live in Brazil. You're not hearing. I am not hearing. It could be only the place in which I live. I'm not hearing sirens all the time. All the time, I'm not.
You're not hearing what?
We're hearing panelaço, which is something we got kind of used to hear for the last couple of years. Of course, the intensity of it is greater now than it ever was, and the frequency of it is like we hear more of it, right? But I don't know if like it changed drastically. But of course, I could be wrong. He also says, okay, C. Oh no, actually I'll jump this one. D. Peter Kutlak. There is a project from this guy called Sounds from Dangerous Places, in which he recorded like things like Chernobyl and coal mines in Africa, if I'm not mistaken. But I guess all field recording nowadays is sounds from dangerous places, right? E, which connects to what you've been talking about, fantasies. Coronavirus as vaccine. Could coronavirus be something like nature's technology against us?
I'm a bit concerned we lost Melissa, actually, because her connection seemed to have dropped. Also, Enrique had a question, and Cliff was asking for a link, just to kind of keep track of everyone who's saying things.
I guess Melissa is not with us, right?
Yeah, she dropped off somehow.
Yeah.
Hopefully she can get back on.
Very strange sounds also.
That was from Melissa. Yeah, I was gonna tell her about the muting, but now she just isn't connected at all.
Yeah.
But anyway, I don't know you, but like where I live here in Brazil, being more at home means almost automatically, or I do use some fancy sound protectors that sound things to make the sound less loud. Like I have this titanium stuff that I put in my ears, and then I don't hear the neighborhoods speaking. Or I have to put music because it's music against music. So actually, I really don't think that in terms of environmental sound in many areas, it's just you're in the house all the time and people are in the house all the time, they put music, and then you have to put music because you don't want to hear the music from the neighborhood. That's my experience.
That's your experience now, or in general?
Yeah, now, because normally I'm not at home so much time, so I can be at home and listen to the neighborhood music if he happens to be at home also at the same time as I am. But it's okay because it's just 1 hour, 2 hours. That's fine.
Yeah, I'm kind of having a different experience altogether, just because I am actually out in the woods. Oh wait.
Maybe she's
Sorry to interrupt you, Paulo. I just because I know it was kind of being addressed to Melissa, and then I saw that she had lost her connection. But it looks like she's back. I just don't know. We don't hear her per se.
It's curious that actually at night people are more like silent here. So like right now it's silent, but there are no animals, just dogs. Dogs
I have
barking.
bears out here.
I was joking, Paulo, because I was doing this. I was trying to collect very bad jokes about quarantine, to make up very bad jokes. Like, well, I won't say them, but anyway, one of these jokes was the neighborhood's dog summer of some simulator that you could put at your home, and then it was a crazy dog barking to see if your neighborhoods get psychic and start killing people like in the movie. Because Paulo has some problems, like he sometimes maybe get a bit psychic because of the dog.
Yeah, if you are hearing closely, you can listen to the dogs barking all the time, and they are coming from here, from my microphone. Only I'm kind of muting the mic all the time, but they are always there. The fucking dogs.
I wonder if I can check in here. Hi, everybody. Boa noite.
Right.
Paulo, I loved your idea that nature is making a super vaccine against human beings. I think that's phenomenal. Uh, but I come to this, I'm not a sound recorder. But I have to say, I come from a improvisational music background, and I'm really curious about how I may insert my approaches and my knowledge and my experience into this conversation. But that's another subject of how we respond to sound. And here we are recording. You're speaking about recording ambient sounds and field recording. What I'm noticing about the difference in the sound environment, first of all, I've found out that one of my neighbors is a Star Trek fan because now they have the time to watch the old TV series. So the theme, da dee da 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 da, is constant now, at least twice a day. But the other thing, on a more serious note, because you're speaking about the dogs barking, in a relatively now quiet neighborhood, especially at night, what's interesting is that we always hear dogs barking, but now there's a distance factor that's really interesting. The sound is in different layers now. You can hear something very far away or more far away than usual because there's no bass background sound of human activity. And I think that's been quite interesting, that we actually deepen our range or lengthen our range of listening.
Yeah, I mean, I've actually had quite a similar experience to that in London because we don't have dogs barking, and depending on where you live, luckily I haven't got any neighbours that are too noisy. But normally in London we have 6 airports, and so the constant aeroplanes landing has just been a staple of London for the last, since I've been born, and suddenly it's gone, and it's completely changed. It's like a fog's been lifted from the city. Kind of that noise pollution that's, it was slightly unsettling at first, but then, now you actually see people walking around and listening to the road differently. You can hear people approaching, you can hear footsteps, and, naturally I've always listened for that stuff, but I think that other people who wouldn't normally, naturally have taken note of the fact that suddenly, it's like their ears have been cleaned.
Yeah, here in Porto is something similar. Everything is it's a lot quieter, and you can hear, like I can hear seagulls all the time, and I am not really close to the ocean. I mean, the city is it's like by the river, but where I live is not that close. But I can hear seagulls, and I can hear them. That's like I can hear them like someone say like you can hear them from really far away now. I can hear that this sound is coming from a few miles out, and it's quite interesting. Like you can hear the echo from the wall of buildings on my left, the left to my window. I can hear the seagulls are on one side and it's bouncing and coming back. And I don't know if that was possible before because I moved here. 2 weeks later, I got locked at home. But right now, at least, it's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, actually, yes, I said before that things did not change so much around, but I guess I'm not as lucky as you, because some of you know where I live, and some of you know with already as a joke that I live in front of a family of neighbors which are extremely noisy, and they are like the whole day making noise all the time, all the time. And it seems like I have some sort of acoustic warp connecting my house with their house, so that and actually I've been making some experiments at the living room. There are points in which I can hear they talk inside their house as if they were like by my side, you know. So yes, I can. Of course, I noticed that the traffic jam, that there are no more traffic jams. The reverberations are way more complex, way more subtle than they were. But usually, what I notice from the differences I notice are more in the color of the sky, in the quality of being able to see better, most probably because of the less pollution. But this family is like a sound mark so huge, which I don't know. I envy you guys.
I just like to interject 1 second because Paulo is saying that he has like this acoustic wormhole between his neighbors and him. He's not crazy. I lived in that apartment for 2 years. It's completely true.
I don't remember it. I was there for 10 days.
It is frighteningly weird. Like they talk on a normal conversational level, and you can hear as if they were next to you. It's a little bit frightening.
Paulo, just to let you know, Melissa is back with us. So
Melissa,
if you wanted to.
Yeah, I'm sorry, my computer has problems. Can you all hear me well?
Very well, yes.
Okay, great.
But I don't know how much of what I was talking you could hear, but what I meant with all that, and there are many other notes which I'll just leave there. I won't read them again or read other notes. But what I meant is, and it's not your case actually, from what I've been hearing you talking, is in these articles, but not all of them, how much of an idealized nature is being proposed? Like, oh, so we can now hear the soothing sounds of the nature, but I mean, there is the possibility of interpreting all this as if there is this division, if we are human and human is different from nature, maybe we are being like nature is threatening us now. I mean, it's kind of scary to think of the invisible enemy, and I don't know what do you think about this idea of and how it could be connected to the practice of field recording, especially nature recording, the ideal nature. What do you think about it?
Do you refer a bit in general, or how I create my work in specific, or maybe both?
No, I mean both. You could comment in general, and then I would be totally interested in hearing about how you approach it with your work.
I think it's a really interesting question, because for a lot of people, especially the ones who live in a more urban space or are not that much in contact, I think there might be a very idealized idea of nature in a way that is, maybe a lot of people just have this sense that is just beautiful, and things work within a specific harmony, in which we think that everything gets on well somehow, and connecting to some things that sometimes I think it's oppressive. It's still ruthless. It still is. And I think that can be transmitted with sound as well. On a bit of slightly a side note, but I have a big interest on indigenous cultures, especially the ones in Central and South America. And I think in English I can say Amerindian perspective, perspectiva Amerindia. There's a total different conception of how we view ourselves in regards to people who are born and live in these cultures, and even how they imagine that animals see themselves as regards to being a predator or a prey. So I do think it is, and I think I also worked for some years with sound design. And it's just very typical if you want, and everyone has this notion, of course, if you want a soothing sound, you will put a lot of like warbles and robins and this kind of singing, very singing birds. And that is like a very quick turn to show you how harmony and beautiful things are happening or are supposed to happen in this sort of environment. I've learned a lot about this when I was in the Atlantic forest. I kind of felt that there's a place for everything that really, really works. Of course, as humans, we are disturbing that. Many of us, because we don't know, we are not familiarized with it. And when I feel that when people do go to a forest that can be a little bit more wild, even if it's quiet. I mean, there's only some sort of predator, let's say, or people are very scared of the dark in general. There's just this conception. And I learned that it doesn't have to be that way if you actually open up your senses a little bit and try to have a little bit of understanding. And as far as I curate my work, I do it on a very something that is just very felt, that is very sensorial for me. And I even think that the titles of the tracks that I put on really reflect that, because it's really the way that I perceive and feel things. So I can have segments that I think the wind is really beautiful on trees. Or I really like developing movements, or something that acoustically it's extremely beautiful to my ears, of course. As I said before, for me it's a very, very personal experience. So I do create a lot of material, my material based on how I feel like with these sort of moments. So not a lot is, there's not much that is actually by chance. And it's just, it's such a sensorial experience for me. Only now, actually, the last 2 weeks, the last couple of weeks, I started to want to catalog the species that that are heard. It's really difficult because I think it requires a lot of experience, and it's just, you know, thousands and thousands of different animals and with different calls and different behaviors. I think that just requires another type of approach. But I think the sensation that I have even before I know that, I mean, for me, cataloging is just a matter of like almost intellectual curiosity. So I really curate on how it makes me feel, or I can get even without knowing specific behaviors of animals in specific, because there's also water or wind, and I really love wind sounds. I really curate mostly based on that, actually.
I'm gonna. Can I ask you a question, or go ahead, Enrique?
Okay.
Sure.
I wanted to know more about how do you set your equipment, because you said I don't know if I understood correctly, but you said that you set the equipment, that you choose the place, and then you go away.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then I wanted to know more about this. How do you set the equipment? If you could comment about, because you're talking about feelings you have about the sounds, but then at the same time in my mind I am thinking, but you're not there. Do you know?
Of course.
Just to clarify this, and then what's the difference for you, and if you what led you to do this? Like you told about not transgressing, or not
not intruding,
not disrupting
maybe.
the nature.
Yeah.
But what is disrupting in this case? I mean, what will make us understand? Because maybe if I stay like still just recording, I'm not disrupting. I don't know.
So to answer your first question, I do have very long recordings, usually, especially the ones that are done during the night. And of course, all sorts of things can happen. But when I sort out and I curate is the perception that I get from what has been recorded previously. I cannot preview, of course, in any way what's happening, especially if I'm new or kind of new to that environment. So it's the way that I curate that material. Really good, nice question, by the way. Thank you for asking that. So it's the way that I curate it that I think it shows that sort of process. This I do more typically at night, but there has been occasions, for example, when I recorded in the Swedish forest, this one time during the days, the winds were just absolutely magnificent. So I did change on purpose my setup, specifically to under some of these big oak trees. Because then I thought instantaneously that was really, really beautiful, and I wanted to hear that. In that specific occasion, I had a lot of long cables that I draw back into the house where I was, so I could be inside and actually hearing what was happening outside. So maybe they are a bit two separate experiences, but it's the curating that I do in the selection that allows me to kind of make chapters or themes from the recordings. When you ask about how I set up, I try to, if I have time, usually I program my field recording trips, if I can tell them like that, in a way that I can walk first, maybe for a day or a day and a half, and get to know a little bit of the places where I'm going to be recording. There's always a random factor and stuff that I absolutely cannot preview, which is also very beautiful. Maybe it's one of the best parts, actually, because usually it's always a very great outcome. And I've learned from experiences that I read and heard from other field recorders that have many years of experience going to the wildest places on earth, literally, that once you come in, you actually disrupt a little bit. And I had, for example, the experiences in Brazil, in the Atlantic forest, where you could hear a spot with a lot of activity, right? Say birds, or maybe you hear like a small animal on the ground, or maybe more. And as you approach, you can actually sense those animals just, going away, and it gets a little bit quieter. And then the opposite, it's when I come back and then I listen to the recordings that I've done during the night, let's say. And then I hear myself, I press record and maybe I do a little bit of adjustment, and then I go away. So I hear myself going away, and then slowly within minutes, like those animals, they come back. So I've really experienced this a lot of times. There's also techniques. George Vlad, which is an incredible nature field recordist, and he's been in places I think no one has ever been before with the experience of recording like he did. He actually camouflages the microphones because birds tend to think it's strange to have this that cat, the windjammer, this fluffy thing. So sometimes he habituates that environment to have the setup for like 1 or 2 days also. So this is the experience that he has on it. And I think there's always a little bit of disruption, but I try not to interfere that much in that way. And even for practical reasons, it's very hard for me to stay very still. If I'm, very close, it's really, really hard. So I really prefer to leave things as they are.
Sorry, can I just add to that whilst we're on the subject of particularly birds? I once went to Iceland with the field recordist Chris Watson, who he told me a little trick, which was if you're in a pair and you have to be out recording with someone else, it turns out that birds can't really count. So if you go with 2 people and then one person leaves the spot and one person remains with the microphones, quite often the birds will just come back and will continue singing.
Didn't know. That's really interesting. Yeah. Very nice tip. Yeah. I do have problems recording with other people. It's so intimate and like personal for me that I really need to do it alone. I really need to do that. But I didn't know about that particularity with birds. Nice.
Can I ask a question about, I think one thing this kind of extends from what Enrique asked and what you were saying. You keep using the word curation, and then you talked about doing these catalogs. And I think there's kind of one thing that's a little almost strange to me is that people seem to differentiate this idea between, music that, for example, you would present live, and this idea of like musical taxonomies and classifications. But there's such a wonderful history of list making, for lack of a better word, in music, like a lot of pieces that are just lists, or people who are, doing lecture, like David Dunn does a lot of this stuff with field recordings, but as kind of performat to present it as the lecture performance. But you kept using the word curation, and then you use chapters. So I'm assuming you don't mix stuff necessarily, but you are curating like where you go record, how you record, how you present that. So I was kind of curious, why, when you say, well, I would like to make a catalog of sounds, and you seem to have distinguished that from, maybe what it is that you have done in the past. I'd be curious, your thoughts on, how you present these things and how you consider what curation is and how you make chapters, to use your words.
I tend to like to think of the idea of cycles. So that's why I have the nocturnal sounds of the Atlantic forest. I mean, admittedly, I also found that the sounds that I heard at night there was the most beautiful. So there's absolutely that intention there. And even now with the Swedish forest textures, it's a kind of a chronologic journey as well. So we start before the dawn, and then it goes on different locations. maybe not with a like huge scrutiny. It's like not maybe some mix a little bit between the hours, but it goes from before the dawn until very deep in the night, which is the last track. And then from then, it's because I like to think nature of this cycle, which is, I guess, it just exists with everything, even though time is a little bit abstract, but there is a cycle to it, even though. And then I choose from that what I found that is more beautiful or that has interesting events. So it's, for me, it's a very simple process how I order it in that way. I haven't, because I've only released these two. I have a lot of field recordings, but because I've only released these two as I don't know if I can call it like conceptual. I mean, I think for me the thought of it is extremely simple. There's not like a huge explanation behind it. I'm very guided by the beauty and the perception that I have from it. But I do think it's a nice way to order it and to kind of learn from how things develop during the day. And from that I choose, what I think it's more interesting, like beautiful events. A lot of the time has to do with acoustics as well. So it's a very simple process. I'm not putting like a huge effort to, or that much of a thought behind it. It's just extremely simple, actually.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I'll try to as Michael did. I'll try to pick something from Enrique and try to develop it.
Mm-hmm.
I know that recording could be like in terms of setting up your equipment, it could be like placing your microphones in a certain distance, one from the other, that you calculated because you have a certain stereo image in your head. It could be very technically driven. Yes. And also, you just said that you have put in doubt the idea of a conceptual framework organizing the albums that you are releasing.
Not too much, no.
Yeah, as I can read in the liner notes of Swedish Forest Texture, you write, I'm hoping to bring not only a sense of admiration, but of belonging in the nature that we often fear and have become increasingly distant as urban spaces advance and separate us from the essence of life. Yes. I'll highlight the sentence. I'm hoping to bring not only a sense of admiration, but one of belonging in the. So I'll come back to the setup.
Okay.
The equipment setup. Yes. One of the techniques that you use, as I read, is to wrap a pair of microphones in the trunk of a tree.
Yeah.
In such a way that you generate a sort of a binaural effect.
Yeah, like a quasi-binaural, yeah.
Yeah, if this is binaural, it would be from the point of hearing of a tree, let's say, which could display, and I know that field recordists are by nature problem solvers, right? Oh, I need to record something like this. You go, you build something like to make your setup better for that situation. But it really calls to my attention that conceptually, the technical solution that you found to record is really adequate. I mean, you are putting someone in the position of belonging, let's say, through a technical solution that's attached to to what I'm calling a concept of the album. The idea of belonging in nature. Mm-hmm. So, for you, do you think that besides the catalog of techniques that we have available, do you think that there is this dimension of technique which could fuse with performance? What I'm calling performance, finding adequate solutions attached to a concept. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, a really nice example of an intersection of technique and concept, for instance.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I see what you mean about that. And just to clarify, everything that you hear in this album, it's recorded with the ORTF, and it's so far what I think it's. At least in this forest, I really felt that it really preserved the acoustics that I wanted to hear. I think it really translates how beautiful the space it was. It's also very practical. For me, I have the blimp set up, so it's very practical and safe to carry, and that really counts a lot because I hiked a lot and I actually lost one microphone during this trip in the snow, in and out, going up and down on cliffs. So there's that side, and what made me try this trunk technique that I really want to continue trying was recordings that I heard. I can write shortly one website. It also has a SoundCloud page. It's called Minnesota Soundscapes. And this was referenced to me by another incredible field recordist. He's very low-key. I don't think he's in the community per se. His name is Vincent. I think he's from the United States. He made beautiful, beautiful recordings in Malaysia, in Borneo, I think. And I thought that was, maybe it's not, the real deal when you are there, but it was just so incredibly beautiful. And he uses this quasi-binaural technique. So it's not, you just have this object in the middle of the microphones, omnidirectional microphones, but it does translate very well to stereo. And I use this as a curiosity. And as soon as I have edited, I can share with you, if I have your emails, this particular recording. Because this tree was like this big tree that had a bird feeder hanged from one of the branches. And we had a lot of seeds in it. And there was, dozens of birds coming in. So I just really wanted to hear how it sounded. So it's just very, impromptu approach to it. I just really wanted to hear how was the sound of this. And you can hear like the birds' the wings flapping so close, and it's like and this for me, yes, is an experience that probably you cannot have in real life. I mean, I don't think I could have been in the place of the microphones and having this proximity, but I also like the sound characteristics of it because it is extremely detailed, but you can also have like more distant perspective. In my opinion, I think it worked really, really, really good. It's something that I definitely want to dig more. But unfortunately, this is one of the microphones that I lost the next day on the snow. So then I have to resort to the other microphones. But I am very happy on how they translated the sound. But it's also interesting because I think his name is Stephen Feld, and he's ethnomusicologist, if I'm not mistaken. He recorded a lot of stuff in Papua Nova Guinea, if I'm saying this correctly. He's been there for years with some of Aboriginal people in this place, And in his opinion, for example, is the XY technique that he literally says that it feels that it's more close to the real forest experience. And he have tried several. How much is that is his own perception compared to what I or any of you would have? We really don't know, but it really was his experience. I have recorded also before when I started a lot of XY, which I really don't dislike, but for me the RTF, I just brought this openness with acoustics that I really enjoyed, more than the AB, which can also be a little bit more tricky to set up. And I think it also requires a bit more of error and try, or try and error. Yeah.
Yeah, it's cool that you mentioned Stephen Feld's solution with the XY setup for recording the forests. And I also don't know if I'll say it correctly, Papua Nova Guinea.
Mm-hmm.
Because the vocabulary that he associates with the forest is with such words as packed, dense, and such ideas, which he tries to convey through this setup. It takes me back to the idea of setting up technology to record something as a performance, as to a conceptual framework, maybe. He also used to like the Nagra recorder, because it's looking for a certain warmth to the sound, which he also associated to the feelings he had in being inside that forest. Anyway, I think it's really interesting how our presence, our conceptions, I guess, are there in the recordings we make, in the technical setups we choose. I don't know. I think this theme is it's a really interesting one, even though some field recordings tend to have a detached idea of their presence in the recording. I guess at the end of the day, they are there as well.
Paulo, if you if there's, I just realized that I kind of skipped a little bit when you, just before you asked me about the belonging. I think that's what I mean, and like I'm no like active activist or anything like that, but I do focus a lot of my reading, and a lot of the information I gather is really about the environment. And I do think that preserving forests in the right way, it's probably the most important thing we can do as humans, as a collective humanity, for all this that has been happening with climate change and so on. And when I say that I hope that it brings this belonging to people, it's just that I wish that people could be so comfortable about being in an environment such as a forest, because one of the really beautiful experiences that I had in the Atlantic forest in 2017, I did like a hiking that I started on at 3 a.m, and there was no moonlight. It was really dark, and I only had this really shitty like flashlight. So it was a bit weird at first, a little bit scary as well. But you know, little by little, your other senses other than vision, they really start to open up, and soon you realize that you don't really have, you respect it a lot, but you really don't have to fear the forest, because you start to realize that, you know, a wildcat is not going to attack you because the wildcat feels like he's needs to. It's people that do that. So it's not. I don't feel like I'm an imminent danger, and I feel that we belong in this sort of environment, even though we are so extraneous from it. So I just wanted like people to be in general a little bit more comfortable in it. You know, that's more about the belonging that I wish that people can feel a little bit more than just feeling that nature is really relaxing or really soothing. It's just there is a place for people in this sort of environment. We come from there, actually. So this is a bit of what I think, just to complete, because I realized that I skipped a little bit before.
No problem.
Mm-hmm.
We want to.
I have a question that I think that relates to that. Like, Melissa, do you think that your not preference, but one of the reasons like that you like so much recording forests and that has to do with this topic of being a foreigner has been coming back ever since the last meeting last week. Do you think one of the reasons that you like recording forests is because you're from a place where that's not a usual soundscape that you're used to hearing? Like when you were in Sweden, the sounds of a Swedish forest, that's something that is kind of foreign to you. So there's let's call it like a mesmerizing effect of going there and listening to that for the first time. And for some reason that there's an appeal to that brings some affection and some sense. But maybe a Swedish person might come to Portugal and want to record Kaiser Sodré because he has never heard anything like that. You know, there's this, I'm in a different place, I'm a foreigner, this is new, so this makes me want to record this and not that. Because I can think of this example, but at the same time I can think of a counter example for my own question, which is, for example, Paulo went to Japan and he recorded a subway. We have subways in Rio, but he found that there was something in the subway in Japan that was worth recording. So I don't know what's your take on that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's very on point. I think that played very much, at least 50-60% on the whole experience. As a person, I really seek novel experiences all the time. That is really just part of my personality. And I need to have this, novelty feed all the time to keep me enthusiastic about stuff. So that completely played a big role. And at the same time that I was exploring the spaces in Sweden, I was also listening how society was so different, like the pace was so different from Porto, where I was living before. And there was also that, but there's an essence to the natural world that for me just, at some level it does speak louder. And I just got increasingly more interested in it, and I just feel more at ease and a bit more in peace, like in these sort of natural environments. But absolutely, for sure, the novelty really brought this leverage to it, of course. Yeah.
I have another set of questions for you. I'll pick up from where you left. You avoided the word activist, but
Yeah.
I mean, when I won't call you an activist, but I noticed this having a voice and speaking out loud about things is a characteristic of your writing and also your work, right? You have ideas and you defend them, like as with for example, you have like blog articles titled as "Freelancing with Sanity."
Yeah.
Guide to be an awesome, respectable badass.
Yeah.
Yeah. or being a sound guy as a girl. This is during our personal conversations, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or how to keep yourself from killing the director.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And also, it always comes to my attention that you dedicate part of the incomes of the albums you produced and you are selling through Bandcamp to institutions like Survival International and then
Right.
and then Amazon Watch, right?
Exactly.
And also in the article from The Guardian that you sent us, it's attached to your mini profile, the idea that field recordings can also be tools to echo activism. In February, Melissa Pons released Swedish Forest Textures, the soundtrack to a documentary, etc. Pons hopes it teaches listeners about European deforestation, which doesn't get nearly as much attention as what's happening in the Amazon. So how can we learn about eco-activism through field recording works?
Well, I think this is also very connected to. I mean, I'm a baby to field recording, right? It's not been that much time, but so many people have been doing it for 30, 40 years. And I think especially the ones who have been recording natural environments, how they are developing with the intrusion of human activity. Maybe it's almost inevitable that you get some sort of connection to the natural world. And I think either directly or indirectly, you do become a voice or a voice for the nature and a voice for the natural world. And let's say, for example, Ben Krause, not sure if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, but I guess most of us know who he is, who has been recording for a long, long time. And from the other field recordings that I know in this community, I think you end up getting some sort of actually important connection to the natural world. And I think you feel that you want to preserve that. And when you get that seen or hear it being intruded and, partially destroyed by human activity, maybe even indirectly you do become a voice for it, and you do want to preserve it. And it's interesting because now that I think about at least a handful of field recordists, I don't think there's at least one that has not been said anything, that hasn't said anything about preserving natural environment, or how it's been destroyed or altered in a negative way because of human activity. So maybe it's inherent to being in contact with nature, and that's really interesting because it's like you cannot actually get indifference from leaving these environments. And this, I feel it just feels very human somehow, in the very good sense now, actually, that maybe it's the sense of belonging that people start to feel, even if they are not actually actively thinking about it. I don't think there's indifference about the activities you are. A lot of field recordists also become, even like in an amateur form, but they become ornithologists. I really see this happening, which is really interesting because I think we start to really want to learn more about what is actually happening in practical terms. And it's just hard for me to say activist because, I receive emails from Greenpeace and a lot of organizations and stuff like that. And the activist performance that these organizations and some people, for example, the people in Survival International, they are extremely active and they are not only keyboard warriors. They are in the field and they run risks, and maybe just a stronger way of doing it. But I think the connection, maybe it's just inevitable, which is great. I think we need that.
So I'll start to wrap it up, if everyone agrees. Talking about maybe, I want to hear you talking about new projects, actually. You even mentioned that some field recordists actually become, with time given, they become ornithologists, for instance. And I know this is something that you've been kind of going through, like cataloging and identifying species of owls, for instance. I heard you talking something. I heard you talk something about that, I guess. Also, you intend to have a more nomadic life, and this is also connected, at least for me, to the semantics of field recording. I also know that you intend to be a part on projects that would connect local food culture and sound somehow, something which I find really interesting. And I wonder if you have any new albums or set of recordings coming out any day soon.
I have some things that I just started to edit that I recorded. I think in the last week of February, I was in the countryside, one of the places in the countryside in the center of Portugal. And I was in this tiny, tiny village, which only had 1 people living in, which was my Airbnb host. And it's absolutely incredible that you're not disturbed by anything else that is human-made. I don't think I have enough good material, or like to my ears, that it's interesting to put out as an album. I did intend to be in Morocco by this time, but I guess traveling is not an option for now. And I intended to go in the desert, and I intended also actually to be over the Ramadan time, which people tend to say can be really, really boring, but I was really interested in understanding how the soundscape can show what it's happening, because it's a very particular, I have never experienced like being in an environment where so many people are doing the same sort of activity like that. But I was very interested to learning, and I was actually thinking, for me to try to be, I'm not religious at all, but for me to try to be very immersed, I was wanting to do the fasting as well throughout the day, and then break it down. I think it's after the last prayer of the day, where people go to and pray. But that is going to be for uncertain future. I hope soon, but we don't really know. And then recently I actually found out there's beautiful forests in Morocco as well, in the middle of the Atlas Mountains. And that will happen sometime in the future. So this is, I think, my next big project, if nothing else comes. I will, during the summer, also record a lot of storks here in the countryside, but I haven't started the research or anything. But I'm trying to get. I really like to be in the countryside and understand how things happen there from this natural perspective. And when you mention about food, it's just there is a project in Brazil from this chef that's called Manu Bufara, and she is connecting climate change to the way that food is produced in every part of the chain, let's say, or the production chain, which allocates people from the specific places uses a lot of their traditional knowledge, and everything is a sustainable process. And I was interested in understanding how this could be all connected and represented in like a sound piece. But again, traveling is kind of a forbidden thing right now. So it will be something more in the future. But it was, yes, connected to environment, which was interesting me a lot. And this food part was also a very interesting side of it, to be able to represent in a sound work how this would happen. But again, everything is kind of frozen at the moment. But yeah, regularly I do some recordings. So I think in the next weeks I can have some countryside with just one guy that lives there in Portugal. I think that's going to be interesting. I thought at first that it was really, really quiet and probably there will be like no material that was interesting enough to actually show. But as I listen more and more, I think I always found out new things, even when I think it can be, a little bit uninteresting or a little bit boring. So there's already, I think, 2 or 3 tracks on SoundCloud on that, just a little short segments. And they are made in the early morning. And there's one thing that is particularly interesting that I found it was really beautiful is that you can hear the church bells from the village 3 kilometers away, a little bit on the distance. And I found this like particularly pretty somehow. I think it just feels good somehow. It's very interesting. So those recordings reflect that as well. But yeah, since my intention was to go a little bit nomadic, maybe 2021 will bring me that, but it's very hard to speak with certainty right now about it. But it's what I intend.
Melissa, if you could give me those links, I can give you my email. We've got, I think Paolo's administering the Facebook page, and I'm kind of administering this email list that we've kind of made for the very purpose of sharing these sorts of things.
Absolutely, yeah.
And yeah, actually, to anybody who's new here and you want to, I think we'll use this email list rather sparingly, like once a week. You can just type your email in the chat, and I can add any of you guys.
Great, I'll do it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I guess we're coming to the end of this session, and I want to thank Melissa for her generosity as always to share her thoughts and experiences with I would say anyone that wants to hear. This was really great to me, Melissa. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the invitation. It was very nice, so lovely to speak with you. I'm sorry about the technical difficulties.
No, I think that worked out really well. Sorry, we've been kind of discussing how this is very much so a work in progress, and that was really kind of proof of concept that even with technical difficulties, this works super well. I think one more thing that we're going to try for those who might come back next week, even though I think we also might find another person to come, but the other idea that Paolo and I had was to also make this somewhat of like a discussion reading group, and we were thinking about stuff that we could read. And I brought up the idea of a paper by a person called Claude Shannon. It's kind of the seminal paper on information theory. It's called A Mathematical Theory of Communication. I know that that's a somewhat daunting name, but I actually think one of the things that's very interesting about this paper is you could almost read it and just ignore all the math, and it can be kind of interesting, because what it's talking about is, communication channels, noise in the system, concepts that are actually not foreign to us, and you could even say quite easily connected to many of the things that we've talked about in the past too. So I'm going to put the link to a version of that paper, and we'll also announce it. And that might be, one of the things that we discuss in the following week, but kind of as, a very open format where it might connect to this and or other things. And maybe Paolo and I will discuss about having someone else also present, because I thought that was really great. So again, yeah, I echo that sentiment. Thank you, Melissa.
Thank you.
So I'll put the link in the chat now, but you'll get it on the email.
Yeah, I would like to thank you also, Melissa. It was nice.
Thank you very much.
And also, I talked to Paulo that if it's of interest, I could also present something on my work on musical collage, plunderphonics, and stuff. Since it's been like already more than 10 years, I do this kind of thing.
Sorry, I think, sorry, I lost the Jitsi chat. I think that'd be great. Would you want to?
It could be like it doesn't need to be next week. I'm just saying I could do it.
Well, why don't we leave that as a possibility, and we can figure that out in the next couple of days. I mean, yeah, Paolo and I can, and you and I can talk and figure out when's the best time for that.
I guess I have the impression Martin wants to say something.
Can you hear me? It worked. Okay. I just wanted to say hello from Austria, Vienna. It's the first time I'm here. I'm a bird watcher and ornithologist and working at Vienna University. I've got introduced to field recording by our very pioneer in Austria. He died 2 years ago. He started in the early 50s, and we are now trying to put together all this archive, the old recordings. In the beginning, he started with a 1 kilometer long cable recording birds about 1 kilometer far. So it's really impressive work. Helped that time by the army to do this. And we will put this together with the Austrian Archive of Sounds. It's part of the scientific academy in Vienna, next doors to my normally office. But now you see my office here is at home, like everybody in Austria. Actually, I wanted to contribute to the so-called binaural recording, which I did a lot in the past. Right now, I'm doing also more recording with the parabolic reflector because I'm hunting bird sounds. It's next to my desk. It's so important. But the binaural recording is really impressive. And I will extract much of my recordings next days, I hope. I did a recording also in a tube in Milano in northern Italy. And when I now think about Italy and all this COVID-19 pandemic, it's interesting to hear these people in the public transport. This city noise, or soundscapes you call it, is really very vivid. When you hear it with such a headphone, you can feel it again. Like walking in the mountains, if you follow a little stream with this head in earphones, you have a 4-dimensional function. You can resolve the time also when you move through landscape. That's quite interesting. Besides, you get some noise, of course. So, and also you did discuss this being together with nature or in nature or leaving it, like Melissa mentioned. When this leaving is a scientific approach, of course. Also, there are devices in woodlands and habitats, also undersea. Perhaps you know that maritime animals are recorded, also for the navies, of course, to a high extent. And I didn't know that as a bird watcher, but they do this for many years. But when you are close, maybe to a nightingale, yeah, I did this in the national park at Lake Neusiedl. You're so close to the bird, maybe 2 meters. You hear some frequencies you never record from a distance. There are some birds have in the beginning noises or vocals which are meant for the partner, not for defending or attracting others. So this is very impressive. Then when you stay, you have a completely different approach when you are recording bird sounds that way, because you have to move completely silent. You have to use shoes which are very silent. It's a really hunting approach. And Mr. Brunner, this pioneer in Austria, was blind, so he couldn't see, but he had an immense feeling and resolution of noises. So he was completely embedded in this nature, and I could learn a bit from him. So we will try to remember his pioneering work here in Austria. Maybe we can put it up also in the website later. Thank you.
It will be. Sorry, it's just thank you, Martin. This would be great. I would love to have access. If you can then share the websites, I would really love to hear and listen. Know more about it.
Yeah, he made very impressive recordings of red deer. You know.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
You have to remember he walked up that mountain as a blind person, maybe with a dog, but he was sometimes very, very close to these red deers. Are a bit more powerful than in North America, and they have really these stunning voices.
Yeah, it's very scary.
It's very scary. Yeah.
It is. Yeah,
very impressive. Yeah, I have a lot of recordings also from him, because we exchanged material from time to time, then also with DAT. And maybe some of you know the DAT heads. Remember the DAT heads? It was in the beginning of internet. There was a American-based group. They were those people going to concerts secretly and recording these noises. And they used also this original headphones, binaural recording mix in ear. But they had experts. I have maybe some emails from that time, because this vanished completely from the internet, to my knowledge. Maybe there's an archive in the States.
Forgive me for asking, what are you friends with Paolo or Melissa? How did you find out about this?
I found Melissa on some, I think it was, how do you call it? This
the Nature Recordist group, is it? Or
maybe that. But you are also on Instagram.
Yeah, it's true.
Instagram thing, yeah.
Cool.
It's very strange, because Instagram is far from any sound, to my knowledge. At least the quality of the recordings is not good for us. But you are using sound.
You had not met Melissa or Paulo before?
Not yet, no. But I was in Brazil. I have a good friend in Sao Paulo, and we did recording in the Mata Atlântica also.
Okay.
And in the Amazon.
That's amazing, because I have family in Vienna. I'm in Vienna like once a year.
So hopefully you can come back to Austria. Yeah.
Someday.
Yeah, from your name, I thought you have European roots.
Yeah, but it's not because of the name. But the name changed.
The name is everywhere. Yes, I know.
Yeah. But that's funny. I was actually in Vienna recently. So wait, you mentioned you teach there or doing research?
I'm doing also research, but I'm working right now at the computer center, so it's not related with sound recording that much. No.
That's so great that you found us.
Yeah, It's interesting, yeah. I have to do some research how it happened. But I think it was mostly Melissa. But I'm on this as a mailing list. I'm not. No, not yet. Please put me on. I'm on the group of the German Central European. There's a group for bird sound. The best museum in Europe or in Central Europe is in Berlin. Tierkunde Museum. They have a huge archive also, and they've got most of the bird vocals by this Austrian recordist, which is also available on the internet. I can provide the link.
Yeah, please do, because I'll kind of collect the links. And your info at bird.at.
Yeah, that's the fast
Cool.
email. Okay, I will switch off. Thanks for having you all.
Thank you for coming.
It's very
Thank
late.
you.
Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, it is late there. Wow. I guess London and
2 o'clock.
okay, cool. Well, I think Paolo and I will figure out maybe with Enrique what we'll do next week, and we'll keep everybody posted. And cool. Thank you, Paolo, for inviting Melissa, and thank you, Melissa, for coming.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation. It was lovely.
And thank you for everyone to joining us in this conversation.
Yeah, I thought this was kind of a bit more fluid. It was nice to hear other people talk. I think we should aim for that a bit more. Continue to.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, see you all. Bye.
Bye.
Paolo, why don't we touch base tomorrow? How's that?
Yeah, sure.
Enrique, you're around tomorrow too, maybe? We'll be in touch.
Bye-bye.
Paolo, that was really good. That was great to hear her talk. She's super interesting.
Yeah, it was very good.
Oh, I don't hear you now. I don't hear you.
No?
Now I do, yeah. Now I do, yeah.
Yeah, it was great, right? And
Yeah,
I guess